In a sterile HR office in Seattle's Pinnacle Tower, a dedicated marketing analyst was about to challenge a system that had silenced women for years. What started as a routine salary review took a shocking turn when they came face to face with systematic corporate discrimination. Chen wasn't your typical compliant employee. For 4 years, she had spent her life exceeding every performance metric at Pinnacle Corp, known for her analytical precision and unwavering work ethic that her immigrant parents had instilled in her. When she encountered HR's dismissive, "not" in budget response while discovering male colleagues earned significantly more, she had no idea she was walking into a legal battle that would consume 18 months of her life. Maya began documenting salary disparities that would lead to exposing a multi-million-dollar discrimination scheme. What began as a simple request for fair compensation would become a corporate reckoning that transformed workplace equality standards. The Seattle tech industry would never be the same after one woman's refusal to accept no cost her former employer $180,000 in legal fees and forced systematic changes that protected countless other women. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Chen sat in the ergonomic chair across from David Holloway's polished desk, her carefully prepared folder balanced on her lap. The HR office smelled of vanilla air freshener and corporate ambition, a sterile blend that made her stomach tighten. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle's Space Needle pierced the gray morning sky, a reminder of how far she'd climbed and how much further she had to go. "Maya," David's voice carried that practiced warmth he reserved for difficult conversations. "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me about your compensation review." She opened her folder with the precision her parents had drilled into her since childhood. Every metric documented, every achievement quantified. 4 years of exceeding targets, of staying late while others left early, of building campaigns that drove Pinnacle Corp's marketing success. The numbers didn't lie even if people did. "As you can see," Maya began, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest, "I've consistently outperformed my targets by 15 to 20% annually. The Meridian campaign alone generated $12 million in new revenue, and the client retention strategy I developed has reduced churn by 38%. David nodded, his expression conveying practiced interest. His fingers drummed silently against his desk, a tell Maya had learned to recognize after countless meetings. It meant he'd already made his decision before she'd walked through the door. "Your contributions are absolutely valued, Maya. No question about that." He leaned back in his chair, hands steepled. "But as I've mentioned before, compensation adjustments need to align with our broader fiscal strategy. Budget constraints, you understand. These are challenging times for everyone." The words felt familiar, worn smooth by repetition. Maya had heard variations of this speech 3 times in the past 2 years. Always the same gentle deflection, the same corporate sympathy that managed to sound both understanding and final. "David," she said, her prepared speech shifting to something more direct, "I need to understand how these budget constraints work, because yesterday I overheard Jake mentioning his raise to Tom near the coffee machine." The drumming stopped. David's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes, a calculation being rapidly recalibrated. "Maya, individual compensation discussions are confidential." "Jake's been here 8 months, she continued, her analytical mind cutting through his deflection like a scalpel through tissue. "He missed his Q2 targets by 12%. His Q3 performance was average at best. Yet somehow, the budget found room for his adjustment." David's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, the practiced warmth in his voice cooled by several degrees. "I understand your frustration, but comparing individual cases isn't productive. Each situation has unique factors: tenure, role complexity, market positioning. The explanation sounded reasonable. It always did. That was David's particular skill, making discrimination sound like sound business practice. Maya felt the familiar weight of self-doubt pressing down on her shoulders. Maybe she was missing something. Maybe her performance wasn't as strong as she thought. No. The numbers were clear. Her results spoke louder than his explanations. What unique factors justify paying someone with less experience and lower performance more than someone who's been carrying this department for 4 years? The question hung in the air between them. David's smile finally slipped, replaced by something harder, more calculated. When he spoke again, his voice carried a subtle edge that Maya had never heard directed at her before. Maya, I'm going to be direct with you. This attitude, this adversarial approach, isn't helpful. We're all part of the same team here. When team members start making unfounded comparisons and accusations, it creates a toxic environment for everyone. Accusations. The word hit her like cold water. She hadn't accused anyone of anything. She'd simply stated facts. But somehow, David had managed to reframe her reasonable questions as an attack on the company culture. Her parents. Voices echoed in her memory. Work twice as hard, be twice as good, and never give them reason to question your loyalty. She'd followed that advice religiously, believing that excellence would be rewarded, that merit would speak for itself. The realization that her loyalty had been taken for granted while her contributions were minimized felt like a physical blow. I'm not being adversarial, Maya said quietly. I'm asking for fair compensation based on documented performance. And I'm telling you that we'll revisit this conversation during the next review cycle. There may be opportunities then, assuming your performance remains strong and your attitude improves. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Improve your attitude. Code for stop asking difficult questions. Maya felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, like tectonic plates realigning after years of pressure. The compliant employee who'd walked into this office was disappearing, replaced by someone who recognized manipulation when she saw it. When will that be? She asked. Spring review cycle. March, potentially April. 6 months, maybe 7. Another delay, another promise of future consideration that would undoubtedly encounter more budget constraints, more unique factors, more reasons why Maya Chen would have to wait just a little longer for recognition that others received as a matter of course. She closed her folder and stood, her movements deliberate and controlled. Thank you for your time, David. Maya, he called as she reached the door. His voice had returned to its practiced warmth, as if the previous tension had been her imagination. I hope you understand that these decisions aren't personal. We value your contributions immensely. She turned back to meet his gaze. I understand perfectly. The words carried a weight that made David's eyes narrow slightly. Yes, she understood. She understood that her excellence had made her valuable, enough to exploit but not valuable enough to reward. She understood that her compliance had been mistaken for contentment. Most importantly, she understood that nothing would change until she changed it herself. Walking back to her desk, Maya passed Marcus Thompson's cubicle. The senior developer looked up from his dual monitors, concern creasing his features. How'd it go? He asked quietly. Maya paused, considering her answer. Marcus had been her closest friend at Pinnacle Corp, the one person who'd listened to her frustrations without judgment. But even Marcus played it safe, always counseling patience over action. About as expected, she said finally. Marcus studied her face. Maya, whatever you're thinking. I'm not thinking anything yet, she said, though they both knew that wasn't true. Just documenting. She settled at her desk and opened a new spreadsheet. At the top, she typed, Compensation Analysis, Pinnacle Corp Marketing Department. Below that, she began entering names, hire dates, and every salary figure she could remember or reasonably estimate. The patterns emerged immediately, stark and undeniable when laid out in black and white. Maya stared at the screen, her analytical mind processing what her heart had always known, but her loyalty had refused to acknowledge. She saved the file and began her real work. Maya stared at her computer screen, the cursor blinking in the first, empty cell of her new spreadsheet. The afternoon light filtering through Pinnacle Corp's floor-to-ceiling windows cast long shadows across her desk, but she barely noticed. Her mind was still processing David's dismissive tone, the casual way he'd threatened her attitude adjustment, the practiced ease with which he'd made her reasonable questions sound like insubordination. She started with what she knew for certain, her own salary, $78,000 after 4 years and 3 performance-based raises that barely kept pace with inflation. Jake's figure came next. She'd overheard enough of his coffee machine conversation to estimate $92,000 for someone 8 months out of college. The disparity looked even worse in stark numerical form. Marcus appeared at her cubicle wall, his voice carefully low. "You're documenting salary information?" "Public records," Maya replied without looking up. "Nothing confidential, just market research." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. She was researching the market, specifically, the market for her own dignity within Pinnacle Corp's walls. Marcus glanced around the open office space, noting which colleagues were within earshot. "Maya, be careful. After what happened with Jessica Wang?" "What exactly happened with Jessica?" Maya's fingers paused over her keyboard. Jessica Wang had been a senior marketing coordinator, someone Maya had looked up to as a potential mentor. One day she was there, the next she was gone, with only vague references to pursuing other opportunities. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "You know, the usual corporate restructuring." But Maya's analytical mind was already connecting dots she'd previously ignored. Jessica's departure had come shortly after she'd been passed over for promotion. A promotion that had gone to Brian Chen, who'd started the same week as Jessica, but somehow leapfrogged her despite having identical qualifications. "Marcus," Maya said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He sat down heavily in the chair beside her desk, recognizing the tone she used when she was about to dissect a problem until its truth was laid bare. "Jake's salary," she continued. "When he mentioned his raise yesterday, what number did you hear?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Maya could see him weighing his loyalty to her against his instinct for self-preservation. The silence stretched until Maya wondered if he'd refuse to answer entirely. 94, he said finally. 94,000. The number hit harder than she'd expected. Not $92,000, but $94,000. $16,000 more than her salary. For someone whose biggest achievement was successfully setting up his company laptop without calling IT. "And Tom?" she asked, referring to another recent hire. "What's his starting figure?" "Maya. What's his starting figure?" Marcus rubbed his temples. 88, but he negotiated up from the initial offer. You know how these things work. She did know. She knew that some people were encouraged to negotiate while others were made to feel grateful for what they received. She knew that some people's attitude problems were called confidence while others' reasonable questions were labeled adversarial. Maya opened a new browser tab and navigated to the company directory. She began cross-referencing hire dates with organizational charts, building a timeline of promotions and departures. The patterns emerged with mathematical precision. In the IR marketing department alone, 3 women had left in the past 18 months. All had been high performers. All had been replaced by men with comparable or lesser qualifications who started at higher salaries. The women who remained, Maya included, had been steadily passed over for advancement opportunities that seemed to flow naturally to their male colleagues. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. How did your meeting go today? We're proud of you for asking for what you deserve. Maya stared at the message, feeling the weight of her parents' expectations. They'd immigrated from Taiwan, with nothing but determination and the belief that America rewarded hard work and merit. They'd sacrificed everything so Maya could have opportunities they'd never had. The idea that she was being systematically undervalued because of her gender would devastate them. Not because they'd blame her, but because it would shatter their faith in the system they'd worked so hard to join. She typed back, "Still processing. We'll call tonight." Maya Chen? The voice belonged to Linda Morrison from the finance department, someone Maya knew only in passing. Linda glanced around nervously before continuing. "Could I speak with you privately? Maybe grab coffee?" 20 minutes later, they sat in the Starbucks on the ground floor of Pinnacle Tower. Linda fidgeted with her cup, clearly struggling with whatever she wanted to say. "I heard you had a meeting with David today," Linda began. "About compensation." Maya nodded carefully. Office gossip traveled fast, but this felt different, more intentional. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," Linda continued, "but I process the payroll adjustments. I see the numbers when they come through." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "The disparity in your department isn't accidental. David has specific guidelines about salary ranges, and they're different for different people." The coffee turned bitter in Maya's mouth. Different how? There are ceiling amounts for certain demographics, unofficial policies about cultural fit and growth potential. It's never written down, but the patterns are clear when you see all the data. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Are you saying there's a systematic policy?" "I'm saying there are patterns that would be very difficult to explain in court," Linda said carefully. "And I'm saying that Jessica Wang figured it out too." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Jessica hadn't left for better opportunities. She'd been forced out for asking the same questions Maya was now asking. The corporate restructuring story was a cover for eliminating someone who'd gotten too close to the truth. "Why are you telling me this?" Maya asked. Linda's smile was sad and knowing. "Because I have a daughter your age. Because I've seen what happens to women who stay quiet, and I've seen what happens to women who speak up. At least if you speak up, you have a chance." They parted ways at the elevator bank, Linda heading back to finance while Maya returned to her desk with a new sense of purpose. She opened her spreadsheet and began expanding it, adding columns for promotion dates, performance review scores, and departure information. With each data point, the discrimination became more apparent, more systematic, more deliberate. Marcus appeared again as the office began to empty for the evening. "You're still here." "I'm building a case," Maya said simply. "Maya, please, think about what you're doing. These companies have teams of lawyers. They have resources we can't imagine. Even if you're right, and I'm not saying you're wrong, is it worth your career?" She looked up at him, this man who'd been her friend for 4 years, who'd listened to her frustrations and offered comfort but never action. For the first time, she saw him clearly. Someone who'd witnessed injustice and chosen silence for the sake of comfort. "Marcus, do you know what I did last quarter?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Maya, I increased campaign conversion rates by 34%. I identified and closed 3 data security vulnerabilities that could have cost the company millions. I trained 2 new hires who are now outperforming their targets." Her voice remained calm, but something steel-hard had entered it. "I did all of that while being paid $16,000 less than Jake, who spent last week arguing that our social media strategy should include more memes." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was subdued. "What are you going to do?" Maya saved her spreadsheet to her personal cloud storage, then opened her email and began forwarding relevant messages to her personal account. Every performance review, every project completion notice, every piece of evidence that documented her contributions and the company's response to them. "I'm going to do what Jessica should have been able to do," she said. "I'm going to make them explain their numbers." As the office lights dimmed around them, Maya continued her work. She thought about her parents' sacrifices, about Linda's quiet courage in sharing the truth, about Jessica Wang and all the other women who'd been forced to choose between dignity and employment. The spreadsheet grew with each entry, becoming something more than a collection of data points. It was becoming evidence. It was becoming a weapon. Most importantly, it was becoming the foundation for a fight that Maya Chen was finally ready to have. Tomorrow, she would begin reaching out to employment lawyers. Tonight, she would continue building the case that would either transform Pinnacle Corp or destroy her career in the process. For the first time in 4 years, Maya felt like she was finally doing work that mattered. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she pressed the call button for the 14th floor of the Columbia Center. 3 days had passed since her conversation with Linda Morrison, 3 nights of research that had led her to Sarah Martinez, an employment attorney whose name appeared in multiple news articles about successful discrimination cases against Seattle tech companies. The elevator climbed smoothly through the heart of downtown Seattle, carrying Maya toward a decision she couldn't take back. Through the glass walls, she watched the city spread below her like a circuit board, all precise lines and interconnected systems. The metaphor felt appropriate. She was about to test whether the system would hold when she applied pressure to its most vulnerable points. Sarah Martinez's office occupied a corner suite with views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains. Beyond, the space felt purposefully designed to intimidate corporate executives while comforting plaintiffs. Warm wood paneling mixed with legal awards and photographs of Sarah shaking hands with prominent civil rights leaders. "Ms. Chen," Sarah stood as Maya entered, extending a firm handshake. She was younger than Maya had expected, perhaps early 40s, with silver threading through black hair and eyes that seemed to catalog details with the precision of a trained investigator. "Thank you for coming in. I understand you have concerns about your treatment at Pinnacle Corp." Maya settled into the leather chair across from Sarah's desk, her laptop bag containing 3 days' worth of compiled evidence feeling heavier than it should. "I'm not sure if I have a case, but I think I have a pattern." Sarah's expression sharpened with interest. "Tell me about the pattern." Maya opened her laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet that had consumed her evenings since Tuesday. As she explained the salary disparities, the promotion patterns, and the systematic differences in how male and female employees were treated, Sarah took notes with the focused attention of someone building a mental framework. "This data is quite compelling," Sarah said when Maya finished her initial presentation. "But I need to understand your personal experience before we discuss potential legal action. Walk me through your specific interactions with HR and management." Maya found herself recounting David Holloway's dismissive responses, the budget constraint explanations that somehow never applied to male colleagues, the subtle threats about attitude adjustments. As she spoke, Sarah's pen moved across her legal pad, occasionally pausing to ask clarifying questions that revealed the depth of her experience with employment discrimination cases. "Ms. Chen, what you're describing fits a clear pattern of systemic gender discrimination. The question is whether we can prove it in court and whether you're prepared for what that fight entails." Sarah's tone shifted, becoming more serious. Employment discrimination cases against major corporations are wars of attrition. They have unlimited resources, teams of lawyers whose only job is to make your life miserable until you give up. They'll question every aspect of your work performance, your character, your motivations. They'll try to portray you as a disgruntled employee who can't accept constructive feedback. Maya felt her stomach tighten, but she forced herself to meet Sarah's gaze. "What would happen if I do nothing?" "You'll keep your job, probably receive modest raises that keep you just satisfied enough to stay, but never advance to your full potential. Eventually, you might leave for another company where the same patterns will likely repeat. The system continues unchanged. The words hung between them like a challenge. Maya thought about Linda Morrison's quiet warning, about Jessica Wang's forced departure, about all the women who'd chosen silence over confrontation and found themselves trapped in cycles of systematic undervaluation. If I pursue this, what are the possible outcomes? Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Best case scenario, we win a significant settlement, establish legal precedent, and force Pinnacle Corp to implement genuine policy, changes that benefit all employees. Worst case, we lose, you're blacklisted in the industry, and you spend years recovering financially and professionally. And the realistic scenario? Somewhere in between. Most cases settle out of court once the evidence becomes overwhelming. The question is whether you're willing to endure months or years of legal battle to reach that point. Maya stared out the window at the Seattle skyline, thinking about her parents' journey from Taiwan, their unwavering belief that America rewarded merit and hard work. They'd never had the luxury of fighting systemic discrimination. Survival had required adaptation and acceptance. But they'd given her opportunities they'd never had, including the opportunity to demand fairness. There's something else, Maya said, pulling up Linda Morrison's contact information. I have someone in payroll who's willing to provide inside information about the company's compensation practices. Sarah's eyebrows rose. That's significant. Internal documentation could be crucial to proving systematic discrimination rather than isolated incidents. And I think there are other women who've experienced similar treatment. Jessica Wang left the company under suspicious circumstances. There might be others. A class action lawsuit would be even more powerful, Sarah mused. Multiple plaintiffs with similar experiences create a stronger case and greater potential damages. Maya felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her salary anymore. It was about creating change that would benefit women she'd never met, fighting a battle that could reshape Pinnacle Corp's entire corporate culture. Ms. Martinez, I need to ask you something directly. Do you think we can win? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying the spreadsheet data on Maya's laptop screen. Based on what you've shown me today, I think Pinnacle Corp has been operating with discriminatory practices that they've assumed would never be challenged. Companies get sloppy when they think they're untouchable. The documentation you've compiled suggests they've been very sloppy indeed. She leaned forward, her tone becoming more intense. But winning isn't just about having the right evidence. It's about having the right plaintiff. You'd need to withstand months of scrutiny, maintain your composure under aggressive questioning, and accept that your professional relationships at Pinnacle Corp will be permanently damaged. Maya thought about David Holloway's condescending smile, about Jake's casual mention of his unearned raise, about the quiet resignation in Linda Morrison's voice when she'd described seeing patterns that would be difficult to explain in court. If I'm going to do this, what's the next step? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah opened her desk drawer and pulled out a client agreement. First, we formalize our relationship. I work on contingency for employment discrimination cases, which means you don't pay unless we win or settle. Second, we begin formal documentation of your treatment going forward. Every interaction with management gets recorded and reported to me. Third, we start building our witness list and evidence collection. Maya's hand hovered over the pen Sarah offered. Once she signed this document, there would be no pretending this was just research or curiosity. She would officially become a plaintiff in a discrimination lawsuit against her employer. Ms. Chen, Sarah said gently, I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've seen what happens to women who fight these battles, and I've seen what happens to women who don't. The ones who fight don't always win, but they never regret trying to change things. The ones who don't fight always wonder what might have been possible. Maya picked up the pen. As she signed her name to the client agreement, she thought about Jessica Wang, about Linda Morrison's daughter, about all the future employees who might benefit from whatever precedent this case established. What should I expect to happen next? Maya asked, handing back the signed documents. I'll file a complaint with the EEOC within the next week. That starts the formal process and protects you from immediate retaliation. Pinnacle Corp will be notified that they're under investigation, and their legal team will begin preparing their defense. Sarah's expression grew more serious. Maya, once we file that complaint, your relationship with your employer changes forever. They'll be watching everything you do, documenting any possible performance issues, looking for reasons to justify their previous decisions. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? Maya thought about the spreadsheet on her laptop, about the undeniable patterns in the data, about the choice between comfortable silence and uncertain justice. I've been under scrutiny my entire career. The difference is that now I'll be scrutinizing them back. As she left Sarah's office and rode the elevator down to street level, Maya felt something fundamental shift in her relationship with her own life. She was no longer a passive recipient of corporate decisions. She was an active participant in shaping her own destiny. Walking back toward Pinnacle Tower through the bustling Seattle streets, Maya pulled out her phone and composed a text to her parents. Had an important meeting today. We'll call tonight to explain everything. The fight for justice was about to begin, and Maya Chen was finally ready for war. The call came at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday, jarring Maya from her morning coffee. Routine. Sarah Martinez's voice carried an edge of professional urgency that made Maya's stomach clench before she'd even heard the words. They've responded faster than expected, Sarah said without preamble. Pinnacle Corp's legal team filed their initial response to the EEOC complaint yesterday afternoon. They're taking this seriously. Maya set down her coffee cup, her hand steadier than she'd expected. What does that mean? It means they've hired Amanda Foster from Klein, Barrett and Associates. She's one of the most aggressive corporate defense attorneys in the Pacific Northwest. They're not planning to settle quietly. The name meant nothing to Maya, but Sarah's tone suggested it should. Is that bad for us? It's expensive for them, which tells me they're either very confident in their position or very scared of the precedent this case could set. Amanda doesn't take cases she expects to lose. Maya walked to her apartment window, looking out at the Seattle morning. Somewhere across the city, lawyers she'd never met were developing strategies to destroy her credibility and minimize her claims. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead, she felt an odd sense of clarity. The battle lines were finally drawn. What should I expect at work today? Document everything, every interaction, every meeting, every email. They'll be building a case that you're a problem employee who's using discrimination claims to cover for poor performance. Don't give them any ammunition. Maya arrived at Pinnacle Corp 15 minutes early, as always. But something felt different the moment she stepped off the elevator. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as she passed. Colleagues who usually offered morning greetings suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. The open office space that had felt like a second home for 4 years now felt like hostile territory. Her computer showed 3 new meeting invitations, all from David Holloway. Performance review check-in, Q4 goal setting, and team collaboration. Assessment. None had been on her calendar yesterday. Marcus appeared at her cubicle before she'd finished reviewing her morning emails, his face pale with concern. Maya, what's going on? David's been asking questions about your recent projects. He wanted to know if you've seemed distracted or less focused lately. Maya looked up at her friend, seeing the fear in his eyes. Marcus had a mortgage, 2 kids, and a wife who'd recently returned to grad school. He couldn't afford to be associated with a discrimination lawsuit, even if he supported her privately. Just the usual corporate bureaucracy, she said carefully. Nothing you need to worry about. But Marcus wasn't buying it. Maya, I've been here 6 years. I know what it looks like when the company starts building a file on someone. Please tell me you're not doing something that could hurt your career." Before Maya could respond, David, Holloway's voice cut across the office space. "Maya, could I see you in conference room B for a few minutes?" The conference room was smaller than David's office, with glass walls that made the meeting visible to the entire marketing department. Maya realized immediately that this was intentional. Everyone would see her being called in for what appeared to be a disciplinary meeting. David sat across from her with a fresh legal pad and a recording device she'd never seen him use before. "Maya, I wanted to follow up on our conversation last week about your career development. I've been reviewing your recent performance, and I have some concerns I'd like to discuss." Maya pulled out her phone and opened the voice recording app. Sarah had recommended. "I'd like to record this conversation for my own notes, if that's all right." David's practiced smile faltered slightly. "That won't be necessary. This is just an informal discussion between colleagues. I prefer to have records of important conversations about my performance." For a moment, they stared at each other across the conference table. Maya could see David recalibrating, trying to decide whether to proceed with his planned script or adjust his approach. "Of course," he said finally, his voice maintaining its professional warmth. "I appreciate employees who are thorough in their documentation." The meeting proceeded like a carefully choreographed dance. David raised concerns about Maya's recent attitude changes and decreased team collaboration. He cited specific incidents that Maya remembered differently. Meetings where she'd asked pointed questions about resource allocation, conversations where she'd pushed back against unrealistic deadlines. "For instance," David said, consulting his notes, "last Tuesday's team meeting. Several colleagues mentioned that you seemed confrontational when discussing the Q4 campaign timeline." Maya remembered the meeting clearly. She'd pointed out that the proposed timeline was unrealistic given the team's current workload, and had suggested prioritizing high-impact activities. Her recommendations had ultimately been accepted and implemented. "David, are you referring to my suggestion that we focus on the most effective campaign elements given our resource constraints? The approach that ultimately resulted in a more efficient workflow?" "It's not about the content of your suggestions, Maya. It's about how you present them. Team dynamics are crucial to our success." Maya felt the familiar weight of being tone-policed, of having her ideas judged not on their merit, but on whether she'd presented them with sufficient deference. But now she recognized the pattern for what it was: another tool for undermining women who refused to stay quietly in their assigned roles. "Could you help me understand what specific behaviors you'd like me to change?" David's smile became more strained. "I think we both know that your recent perspective has been affecting your professional relationships. I'm hoping we can work together to address these concerns before they impact your career trajectory." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Maya thought about Sarah's warning that they would try to build a case for poor performance and attitude problems. This meeting was the opening move in that strategy. "I appreciate your feedback, David. I'll certainly take it under consideration." After the meeting, Maya returned to her desk to find an email from IT requesting that she update her computer security settings and install new monitoring software for compliance purposes. Another email from HR reminded her about the company's confidentiality policies and the importance of maintaining professional discretion about internal matters. The message was clear. They were watching. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Jessica Wang. Linda Morrison gave me your contact information. Can we talk?" Maya stared at the message, her heart racing. Jessica Wang, the former employee whose departure had been explained as voluntary restructuring. If Jessica was reaching out, it meant Linda had shared more than just salary information. She typed back, "Yes. When and where?" "Tonight, 7 p.m., Victrola Coffee on Capitol Hill. Come alone." The rest of the day passed in a haze of normal work. Activities made surreal by their new context. Every email she sent might be scrutinized by lawyers. Every conversation with colleagues might be reported back to management. Every project she completed would be evaluated not just for quality, but for evidence of the attitude problems David was documenting. Marcus stopped by her desk again as the office began to empty for the evening. "Maya, people are talking. There. Are rumors about meetings with lawyers, about complaints being filed? Is it true?" Maya looked at her oldest friend at Pinnacle Corp, seeing the conflict in his face. He wanted to support her, but he also wanted to protect himself. She couldn't blame him for that calculation. She might have made the same choice 6 months ago. "Marcus, whatever you've heard, I need you to know that I'm not doing this lightly. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do." "For who?" "Maya, even if you're right about everything, even if you win, what do you think happens to the rest of us? You think David's going to forget who supported you and who stayed neutral?" Maya felt the isolation settling around her like a cold fog. This was what Sarah had warned her about, the way fighting systemic discrimination turned you into a pariah, even among people who privately agreed with you. "I understand if you can't support me publicly," Maya said quietly. "I just hope you can understand why I have to do this." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said finally, and walked away. As Maya gathered her things to leave for her meeting with Jessica Wang, she received one final email of the day. It was from Bob Pinnacle himself, the CEO she'd only seen at company all-hands meetings. The subject line read, "Commitment to excellence and collaboration." The message was brief and seemingly generic, a reminder about Pinnacle Corp's values and the importance of maintaining a positive, collaborative work environment. But Maya knew it wasn't coincidental. The CEO of a multi-million-dollar company didn't send personal emails to mid-level employees without reason. The war had begun, and Maya Chen was discovering that the battlefield was larger and more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. The Victrola coffee on Capitol Hill buzzed with the familiar energy of Seattle's evening crowd. Students bent over laptops, artists sketching in notebooks, tech workers unwinding from their corporate days. Maya chose a corner table with clear sightlines to both entrances, a habit she'd developed since filing her complaint. Paranoia felt like prudence now. Jessica Wang arrived precisely at 7, her appearance strikingly different from the polished, professional Maya remembered. Gone was the corporate armor of tailored blazers and careful makeup. This Jessica wore jeans and a faded sweater, her hair longer and less structured, as if she'd deliberately shed every trace of her Pinnacle Corp identity. "You look like someone who's been sleeping poorly," Jessica said without preamble, settling into the chair across from Maya. Maya managed a tired smile. "It's been an interesting week. It's about to get more interesting." Jessica pulled a manila folder from her bag, sliding it across the table. Linda Morrison wasn't the only person keeping track of Pinnacle's discriminatory practices. "I've been documenting everything since I left." Maya opened the folder to find photographs of emails, printed payroll records, and what appeared to be internal HR communications. Her breath caught as she recognized the systematic nature of the evidence. This wasn't the work of a disgruntled former employee, but of someone who'd methodically built a case. "How did you get access to these documents?" Jessica's smile was sharp and bitter. "You forget how closely the marketing and HR departments work together. I had legitimate access to most of this information while I was building my own discrimination complaint. The rest came from allies still inside the company." Maya studied the documents, her analytical mind quickly processing the patterns they revealed. Salary disparities that went far beyond her own department. Performance reviews that showed identical language being used to justify different outcomes for male and female employees. Email chains where David Holloway explicitly discussed managing expectations for certain demographics. Jessica, This is explosive. Why didn't you pursue legal action when you had all this? The question hung between them for a moment. Jessica stared into her coffee cup, and Maya saw something broken and tired in her expression. Because I was a single mother with a mortgage and no savings. Because David made it clear that fighting them would mean being blacklisted in the industry. Because I was scared and alone and convinced that keeping my head down was the only way to survive. Maya felt the weight of privilege in her own position, no children depending on her, parents who could provide financial support if necessary, the luxury of taking risks that Jessica hadn't been able to afford. What changed your mind about staying silent? Linda told me you'd filed a complaint, said you had a lawyer and weren't backing down. Jessica met Maya's eyes directly. I realized I'd been protecting the same system that destroyed my career. My silence wasn't keeping me safe. It was enabling them to hurt other women. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Martinez. Free to talk? Important developments. My attorney wants to speak with me, Maya said. Would you be willing to meet with her as a potential witness? Jessica was quiet for a long moment, staring out the coffee shop window at the Seattle evening. You need to understand what you're asking. Once I formally join your case, I can't pretend this is behind me anymore. I'll have to relive everything that happened, submit to depositions, face David and Amanda Foster's attempts to destroy my credibility. I understand. I'm asking because we're stronger together than we are separately. Your lawyer, is she good? Sarah Martinez. She specializes in employment discrimination and has a track record of winning against major corporations. Jessica nodded slowly. I'll meet with her. But Maya, you need to know what you're really up against. Amanda Foster doesn't just defend companies. She destroys plaintiffs. She'll investigate every aspect of your life, looking for ammunition. Failed relationships, college drinking, anything she can use to paint you as unstable or vindictive. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Seattle weather. How do you know so much about Amanda Foster? Because she represented Pinnacle Corp during my exit negotiations. I may not have filed a formal complaint, but I made enough noise that they brought in the heavy artillery to make sure I disappeared quietly. They spent the next hour going through Jessica's documentation, with Maya taking photos of the most damaging evidence. As they worked, Jessica shared stories about her final months at Pinnacle Corp, the subtle retaliation, the impossible performance standards, the gradual isolation from colleagues who'd been warned to keep their distance. The worst part, Jessica said, was how they made me doubt myself. By the end, I was convinced that maybe I really was difficult to work with. Maybe I really did have attitude problems. It took months of therapy to understand that gaslighting was part of their strategy. Maya's phone rang. Sarah Martinez's name appeared on the screen. Sarah, I'm here with Jessica Wang. We've been reviewing some additional evidence. Perfect timing. I just received a call from Amanda Foster. Pinnacle Corp wants to schedule a meeting to discuss resolving this matter amicably before it goes any further. Maya felt her heart rate increase. That sounds like they're ready to settle. Or they're trying to gauge our strength before they escalate their defense strategy. Either way, it means our complaint got their attention. Can you and Jessica meet me tomorrow morning? I want to review everything before we respond to their proposal. After hanging up, Maya shared the development with Jessica, who laughed bitterly. They're scared. Good. They should be. Jessica, there's something else I need to ask you. Do you know Dr. Patricia Kim? She's a labor economist who's done research on workplace discrimination. I know her work. Why? Sarah thinks we need an expert witness to provide statistical analysis of Pinnacle's employment practices. Someone who can demonstrate that our experiences are part of a systematic pattern. Jessica pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. I can do better than that. Patricia Kim was my professor in grad school before I went into marketing. We've stayed in touch. If anyone can prove systematic discrimination using statistical analysis, it's her. Maya felt a surge of hope. They were building something larger than individual complaints. They were constructing a comprehensive case that could force real change. Would you be willing to reach out to her? Already composing the email, Jessica said, her fingers moving across her phone screen. Maya, I want you to understand something. When I left Pinnacle Corp, I thought I was protecting myself, but I was really protecting them. Every day I stayed. Silent was another day they could continue discriminating against other women. Maya watched Jessica type, seeing the transformation happening in real time. The broken, tired woman who'd entered the coffee shop was becoming someone else, someone angry and determined and ready to fight. There's one more thing, Jessica said, looking up from her phone. Marcus Thompson, he's been your ally through this? He's been supportive, but he's also scared. He can't afford to lose his job. Marcus was one of the people who witnessed my interactions with David during my final weeks. He saw how they treated me, and he said nothing. I don't blame him for that. I understand the position he was in. But if he's truly your ally now, he needs to decide whether he's going to help or just watch from the sidelines. Maya thought about Marcus's conflicted expression, his warnings about not rocking the boat, his visible fear when David had started asking questions about her recent behavior. How do I ask someone to risk their career for my fight? You don't ask, Jessica said firmly. You give them the opportunity to do what's right, and you accept whatever decision they make. But Maya, you also need to understand that neutrality isn't neutral when you're fighting systematic oppression. Silence protects the oppressor, not the oppressed. As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Jessica handed Maya a business card. This is my current contact information. I'm freelancing now, which gives me more flexibility to fight this battle. Whatever you need from me, whatever testimony or evidence Sarah requires, I'm in. Maya felt the isolation of the past week lifting slightly. She wasn't alone anymore. She had allies, evidence, and a growing case that could expose Pinnacle Corp's discriminatory practices to the scrutiny they'd avoided for years. Walking back to her car through the Capitol Hill evening, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Can we talk tomorrow? There are things you need to know about what's happening at the office. The message could mean anything. Support, betrayal, or something in between. But Maya no longer felt afraid of the unknown. She was building something bigger than her individual grievance, something that could create lasting change. The war was escalating, but now she had an army. The law offices of Klein, Barrett, and Associates occupied 3 floors of the Columbia Tower, their stark modernity designed to intimidate rather than comfort. Maya sat in the marble-lined lobby at 8:45 a.m., watching well-dressed attorneys stride purposefully through the space like predators in an expensive ecosystem. Today was her deposition, her first formal interrogation under oath by Amanda Foster and Pinnacle Corp's defense team. Sarah Martinez emerged from the elevator bank, her expression focused and battle-ready. How are you feeling? Like I'm about to be dissected by experts, Maya replied honestly. Good. That awareness will keep you sharp. Sarah's voice carried the calm authority Maya had come to rely on. Remember what we practiced. Answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information. If you don't understand a question, ask for clarification. And Maya, they're going to try to provoke you. Don't take the bait. The deposition room was smaller than Maya had expected, dominated by a polished conference table surrounded by black, leather chairs. A court reporter sat at one end, her fingers poised over a stenotype machine that would capture every word. Video cameras recorded from multiple angles, preserving not just Maya's testimony, but every facial expression and gesture. Amanda Foster entered the room like a force of nature. Tall, impeccably dressed, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to catalog weaknesses with surgical precision. She moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to winning, her very presence designed to remind everyone that she represented power and resources Maya couldn't match. Ms. Chen, Amanda's voice was professionally cordial, but Maya detected the underlying steel. Thank you for your time today. I know this process can be stressful, but I'm simply trying to understand your perspective on your employment experience at Pinnacle Corp. The questioning began deceptively gently. Amanda walked Maya through her educational background, her hiring at Pinnacle Corp, her initial job responsibilities. But Maya recognized the strategy, establishing baseline facts before the assault began. Now, Ms. Chen, you've alleged that you were discriminated against because of your gender. Is that correct? Yes. But you were hired by Pinnacle Corp, correct? A company you're now claiming discriminates against women hired you, promoted you, and gave you increasing responsibilities over 4 years? Maya felt the first trap being laid. Yes, they hired me. But hiring women doesn't preclude discriminating against them in compensation and advancement. I see. So your complaint isn't that you weren't valued, but that you weren't valued enough? Sarah's objection cut through the air. Argumentative, Amanda smiled and rephrased. Ms. Chen, did you receive performance bonuses during your employment? Yes, but they were significantly smaller than bonuses received by male colleagues, with comparable or lesser performance. How do you know the bonus amounts received by your male colleagues? Maya hesitated, realizing she was about to reveal information that could compromise her sources. Through conversations and observations in the workplace. Conversations? You mean gossip? I mean information shared by colleagues about their compensation. Amanda's questioning grew sharper, probing every aspect of Maya's work performance. She produced emails where Maya had disagreed with marketing strategies, meetings where she'd challenged budget allocations, instances where colleagues had complained about her directness. Ms. Chen, this email from November 15th shows you disagreeing with your supervisor's campaign timeline. Would you characterize yourself as someone who accepts direction well? Maya felt her temper flare, but forced herself to remain calm. I would characterize myself as someone who provides professional input when I believe improvements are possible. Even when that input contradicts your supervisor's decisions? Especially then, my job is to help create successful campaigns, not to rubber stamp poor decisions. Amanda's smile became predatory. Poor decisions? So you believe your supervisors regularly make poor decisions? I believe everyone makes mistakes, and that good teams catch and correct those mistakes before they become problems. The questions continued for hours, with Amanda systematically attacking Maya's character, performance, and motivations. She suggested Maya was a difficult employee who couldn't accept constructive criticism. She implied Maya's discrimination complaint was revenge for receiving negative feedback. She painted Maya as someone whose unrealistic salary expectations reflected an inflated sense of her own value. During a break, Sarah pulled Maya aside. You're doing well. She's fishing, trying to find something that undermines your credibility. Don't give her anything. Sarah, she's making me sound like a delusional narcissist who can't handle being managed. That's exactly what she's trying to do. But your performance record speaks for itself. Let the facts tell the story. When questioning resumed, Amanda shifted tactics. Ms. Chen, you've claimed that male colleagues received higher compensation. Are you aware that salary decisions involve multiple factors beyond gender? Yes, but when those factors consistently disadvantage women while advantaging men, they become tools of discrimination. Tools of discrimination? That's a very strong accusation. Are you suggesting that Pinnacle Corp's management deliberately conspires to discriminate against women? Maya thought about Linda Morrison's careful words, about Jessica Wang's documentation, about the patterns that emerged when you actually looked at the data. I'm suggesting that the impact of their decisions creates discriminatory outcomes, whether or not that discrimination is intentional. Amanda leaned forward slightly. Ms. Chen, isn't it possible that your male colleagues simply negotiated more effectively for their salaries? Are you suggesting that women are inherently worse negotiators, or that the system rewards aggressive negotiation differently based on gender? I'm suggesting that individual outcomes reflect individual choices and capabilities. Maya felt the weight of every woman who'd been told her lower salary was her own fault for not negotiating hard enough. And I'm suggesting that when women negotiate aggressively, they're labeled difficult and confrontational, while men who use identical tactics are considered strong leaders. The deposition continued past lunch, with Amanda exploring every aspect of Maya's personal and professional life. She asked about Maya's relationships, her finances, her career ambitions, her interactions with therapists and counselors. Each question felt like a scalpel, designed to find psychological wounds that could be exploited. Ms. Chen, you've never been married. Would you say you have difficulty maintaining long-term relationships? Sarah's objection was immediate and sharp. Relevance? I'm exploring the plaintiff's general attitude toward conflict and collaboration. Maya felt something cold and furious settling in her chest. My relationship status has nothing to do with workplace discrimination. Doesn't it? If you have difficulty collaborating in personal relationships, might that explain your workplace conflicts? My workplace conflicts, as you call them, involve advocating for equal treatment. If that's difficult to collaborate with, the problem isn't my attitude. Amanda's questioning finally concluded near 4 p.m., leaving Maya drained and angry. As they packed up their materials, Amanda made a point of speaking directly to Maya. Ms. Chen, I hope you understand that this process will only become more intensive. We have months of investigation ahead of us, and every aspect of your life will be scrutinized. It's not too late to reconsider whether this battle is worth the cost. Maya met Amanda's gaze steadily. Ms. Foster, I hope you understand that some battles are worth fighting regardless of the cost. Outside the offices, Sarah and Maya walked in silence toward Pike Place Market, needing distance from the corporate towers before debriefing. How bad was it? Maya asked finally. You held up well under extremely aggressive questioning. Amanda was trying to rattle you into making admissions she could use later. You didn't give her what she wanted. But she's very good at what she does. She'll use pieces of your testimony to build a narrative about you as a difficult employee with unrealistic expectations. We need to be prepared for that. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Can you meet tonight? I have information. You need to see. Sarah noticed Maya checking her phone. More witnesses? Maybe. Marcus Thompson. He's been conflicted about supporting the case, but he might be ready to step forward. Internal witnesses are crucial. The more people willing to testify about the company's practices, the stronger our position becomes. As they walked through the evening bustle of downtown Seattle, Maya reflected on the day's ordeal. Amanda Foster's questions had been designed to make her doubt herself, to suggest that her experiences were the result of personal failings rather than systematic discrimination. But instead of feeling defeated, Maya felt more determined than ever. The deposition had been a preview of the battle ahead, brutal, personal, and designed to break her resolve. But Maya Chen had endured 6 hours of professional assault without backing down. If this was what fighting systematic discrimination required, she was ready for war. Bob Pinnacle stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching the Seattle skyline emerge from the morning fog. 32 floors below, the city hummed with the energy of ambition and innovation, the same energy that had driven him to build Pinnacle Corp from a 3-person startup into a multi-million-dollar corporation. But this morning, the view felt more like a judgment than an inspiration. The manila folder on his desk contained copies of depositions, internal emails, and payroll analyses that painted a picture of his company he barely recognized. Amanda Foster had insisted he review everything before their 9 a.m. strategy meeting, warning him that Chen's legal team was building a case that could cost Pinnacle Corp millions in damages and reputation. The door to his office opened without a knock, a privilege reserved for only 2 people in the company. His assistant would have announced anyone else, but David Holloway had been with him since the early days, back when they'd shared a cramped office in Pioneer Square and survived on coffee and determination. "Bob, we need to talk." David's usual corporate polish looked strained around the edges. "Amanda's briefing this morning is going to be intense." Bob turned from the window, studying his longtime friend and business partner. David had been the one to build Pinnacle's HR infrastructure as they'd grown, the one who'd implemented the policies and procedures that had allowed them to scale from dozens to hundreds of employees. If there were systematic problems with how they treated their workforce, David would have been at the center of them. "How bad is it, David?" David closed the office door and moved to the conference area, avoiding direct eye contact. "The Chen woman has more evidence than we anticipated, and now she has Jessica Wang cooperating with her legal team." Bob felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Jessica Wang? I thought her departure was amicable." "It was, until Linda Morrison decided to share confidential payroll information and Jessica decided to become a whistleblower." The words hung in the air between them. Bob had built Pinnacle Corp on principles of innovation and equality, values he'd articulated in countless company meetings and public statements. The idea that those values had been compromised under his leadership felt like a personal betrayal. "David, I need you to be completely honest with me. Are we systematically discriminating against women in our compensation and promotion practices?" David's pause lasted several seconds too long. "Bob, the employment landscape is complex. We have to balance market conditions, individual performance, negotiation dynamics, cultural fit. That's not what I asked." Bob's voice carried an edge David hadn't heard since their startup days, when every decision could make or break the company. "Are we paying women less than men for comparable work?" David sat down heavily in one of the conference chairs. "There are disparities, yes, but they're not discriminatory in intent. They reflect legitimate business considerations." "Show me." Bob pulled up the payroll analysis Amanda Foster had prepared, spreading the documents across the conference table. The numbers were stark and undeniable when laid out in spreadsheet form. Women across multiple departments earned 15–20% less than their male counterparts. Promotion rates for women had declined over the past 3 years. Performance review language showed subtle but consistent differences in how identical behaviors were characterized for male and female employees. "David, this looks like systematic discrimination to me." "It looks that way because Chen and her lawyer are cherry-picking data to support their narrative," David replied, his voice gaining defensive strength. "They're not accounting for tenure, negotiation history, role complexity, market positioning." "Then explain Jake Morrison to me." Bob pointed to a specific line item in the salary analysis. 8 months with the company, starting salary of $94,000. Chen, 4 years with the company, current salary $78,000. How does that reflect tenure or role complexity? David shifted uncomfortably. Jake had leverage in his negotiation. He had competing offers, specific skills we needed. And Maya didn't? Maya, who increased our campaign conversion rates by 34% last quarter? Maya, who identified the security vulnerabilities that could have cost us millions. Bob stood and walked back to the window, processing the implications of what he was seeing. This wasn't just about one employee's compensation complaint. It was about the culture and values he'd thought he was building at Pinnacle Corp. "Bob," David's voice took on a pleading quality. "You have to understand the broader context. We're competing in a market where aggressive negotiators get rewarded. If women don't negotiate as effectively, stop." Bob turned back to face his old friend. "You're telling me that our compensation system rewards aggression over performance. And when women are aggressive negotiators, they're labeled difficult and confrontational. So, either way, they lose. David opened his mouth to respond, but Bob continued before he could speak. I've been reading the depositions, David. I've seen the emails where you discuss managing expectations for certain demographics. I've seen the performance reviews where identical behaviors are called leadership for men and attitude problems for women. Those communications are being taken out of context, are they? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like we've built a system that systematically undervalues women while maintaining plausible deniability. The office door opened again, and Amanda Foster entered with her usual commanding presence. She carried a thick briefcase and the expression of someone preparing for battle. Gentlemen, we need to discuss strategy. Maya Chen's team has added Dr. Patricia Kim as an expert witness, and her preliminary analysis is problematic for our defense. Amanda spread her own documents across the conference table, statistical analyses, legal precedents, and risk assessments that painted Pinnacle Corp's situation in stark financial terms. Dr. Kim's analysis shows systematic wage disparities that extend across multiple departments and job levels. Her statistical models demonstrate that gender is a significant predictor of compensation differences, even when controlling for experience, performance, and other legitimate factors. Bob studied the documents, feeling the weight of leadership in a way he hadn't experienced since the company's early survival struggles. What's our potential exposure? In a worst-case scenario, 15 to 20 million in damages plus legal fees and mandatory policy changes. But the reputational damage could be far worse. This case is getting media attention. If we lose publicly, it affects our ability to recruit talent, maintain client relationships, and preserve shareholder confidence. David leaned forward. Amanda, what about settlement? Can we resolve this quietly? Maya Chen's attorney has indicated they're open to discussions, but their demands are significant. Full compensation adjustments for affected employees, policy changes with independent oversight, and public acknowledgement of past discriminatory practices. Bob felt the pieces of his carefully constructed worldview rearranging themselves. What if they're right? What if we have been systematically discriminating? Amanda's expression didn't change, but Bob caught the slight tension around her eyes. Bob, from a legal perspective, what matters isn't intent, but impact. If our practices have created discriminatory outcomes, we're liable regardless of whether that discrimination was intentional. But if it was intentional, if David and I built systems that perpetuated inequality, then we have a moral obligation beyond legal liability. David's voice rose slightly. Bob, you can't seriously be considering admitting wrongdoing. That's exactly what their legal team wants, an admission of guilt that justifies massive damages. Bob looked at his old friend, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. David wasn't just defending the company's practices. He was defending his own decisions, his own role in creating whatever discrimination had occurred. David, if we've been discriminating against our employees, don't you think we should acknowledge that and make it right? I think we should protect the company and the jobs of the hundreds of people who work here. This isn't just about Maya Chen anymore. It's about whether Pinnacle Corp survives as a viable business. Amanda watched the exchange with professional interest, recognizing the moment when client unity began to fracture. Gentlemen, you need to decide whether you're fighting this case or settling it, but you need to decide quickly. Every day we delay increases our legal costs and gives Maya Chen's team more time to build their case. Bob walked back to the window, looking out at the city where he'd built his success. The values he'd thought he was embodying, merit-based, advancement, equal opportunity, fair compensation, had apparently been compromised somewhere along the way. The question now was whether he had the courage to acknowledge that failure and make genuine changes, even if it cost him everything he'd built. Schedule a board meeting for tomorrow, he said finally. I want to review everything with our directors before we make any final decisions. As Amanda and David left his office, Bob remained at the window, contemplating the price of leadership, when leadership meant confronting uncomfortable truths about the organization you'd created. Maya Chen's lawsuit had forced him to examine not just Pinnacle Corp's practices, but his own complicity in perpetuating systems of inequality. The fog was lifting from the Seattle skyline, revealing the city in sharp, unforgiving detail. Bob wondered if the same clarity was about to illuminate his company's practices, and whether Pinnacle Corp would survive that level of scrutiny. The boardroom at Pinnacle Corp had never felt as tense as it did on this gray Seattle morning. 8 directors sat around the polished oak table, their faces reflecting varying degrees of concern, skepticism, and barely contained panic. Bob Pinnacle occupied his usual seat at the head of the table, but his typical confidence had been replaced by the weary expression of a leader forced to confront uncomfortable truths about his own organization. Amanda Foster stood at the presentation screen, her laser pointer tracing across financial projections that painted Pinnacle Corp's future in increasingly dark shades of red. Our current legal exposure ranges from $12 to $25 million, depending on whether this becomes a class action lawsuit and how the jury interprets the discrimination evidence. Board member Catherine Walsh, the former CEO of a major consulting firm, leaned forward. Amanda, what's the likelihood of Maya Chen's team proving systematic discrimination? Higher than I'd like to admit. Dr. Patricia Kim's statistical analysis is compelling. She's identified wage gaps that persist even when controlling for performance, experience, and role complexity. Combined with Jessica Wang's testimony and the internal documentation Linda Morrison provided, they have a strong foundation. Bob watched his board members' faces as Amanda detailed the evidence against them. These were successful business leaders who'd built their careers on making difficult decisions under pressure. But none of them had anticipated that Pinnacle Corp's growth and success might have been built on systematic inequality. "What about our defense strategy?" asked board member Michael Torres, a venture capitalist who'd been one of Pinnacle's earliest investors. "Surely we can challenge their methodology, question their assumptions." Amanda's expression remained professional, but Bob detected a note of frustration. "We've tried. Maya Chen's performance record is exemplary. Jessica, Wang's departure can't be explained away as performance-related. The pattern of compensation disparities is too consistent to dismiss as coincidental." David Holloway, who'd been unusually quiet throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. "We need to consider the broader context here. Maya Chen filed this complaint. After being denied a raise, this could be seen as retaliation for legitimate business decisions." Board member Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Maya, raised an eyebrow. "David, are you suggesting that denying someone a raise justifies discrimination?" "I'm suggesting that employment decisions involve complex factors that can't be reduced to simple gender comparisons." Bob felt the familiar tension that had characterized his recent interactions with David. His old friend seemed incapable of acknowledging that their hiring and compensation practices might have been fundamentally flawed. "David," Bob said carefully, "I've reviewed the evidence myself. The patterns are clear and consistent. We have systematically paid women less than men for comparable work." "Bob, you're oversimplifying." "Am I?" Bob's voice carried an edge that made several board members shift uncomfortably. "Because the data seems pretty clear to me. Maya Chen has outperformed most of her male colleagues while earning significantly less. Jessica Wang was forced out after questioning promotion, decisions that favored less qualified men. Linda Morrison documented compensation disparities that span multiple departments." Amanda stepped forward before the conflict could escalate further. "The question isn't whether discrimination occurred. The evidence strongly suggests it did. The question is how we respond. We have 3 options: fight the case and risk a devastating public loss, settle privately with non-disclosure agreements, or settle publicly with acknowledgement of past practices and commitment to reform." Catherine Walsh studied the settlement proposals Amanda had distributed. What are Maya Chen's terms for a private settlement? Substantial financial compensation for affected employees, policy changes with independent oversight, and confidential acknowledgement of discriminatory practices. No public admission of wrongdoing, but internal recognition that changes are necessary. And for a public settlement? Amanda's pause was telling. Similar financial terms, but with public acknowledgement of past discrimination and commitment to transparent reform. They want to use Pinnacle Corp as an example of corporate accountability in action. Michael Torres shook his head. A public admission of systematic discrimination would be corporate suicide. Our clients would lose confidence. Our competitors would use it against us. Our stock price would crater. Would it? Bob asked quietly. Or would it position us as a company willing to confront its mistakes and implement genuine change? The boardroom fell silent. Dr. Sarah Chen was the first to speak. Bob, there's precedent for companies that have acknowledged discrimination and survived. Intel's commitment to pay equity actually enhanced their reputation among both employees and clients. Sometimes admitting mistakes demonstrates strength rather than weakness. David's voice rose slightly. Sarah, with respect, Intel had the resources to absorb the financial and reputational hit. We're not Intel. A public admission of systematic discrimination could destroy everything we've built. Bob looked around the table at the faces of people who'd supported Pinnacle Corp's growth for years. These were smart, successful individuals who'd trusted his leadership and vision. Now he was asking them to support a decision that could cost them millions and potentially threaten the company's survival. I need to share something with all of you, Bob said, standing and walking to the window that overlooked Seattle's downtown core. When I started this company, I believed we were building something different. I thought merit would be rewarded regardless of gender, race, or background. I thought our success proved we were creating equal opportunities for everyone. He turned back to face the board. I was wrong. The evidence shows that we've systematically undervalued women while rewarding men for identical contributions. We've created a culture where aggressive negotiation is rewarded for some employees but penalized for others. We've allowed personal biases to influence business decisions in ways that have harmed real people's careers and lives. David started to interrupt, but Bob continued. Maya Chen didn't file this lawsuit because she's vindictive or unreasonable. She filed it because she trusted the system to recognize her contributions, and when that didn't happen, she demanded accountability. Jessica Wang left the company because we made it clear that questioning our decisions would result in career damage. Linda Morrison risked her job to provide evidence because she couldn't stomach watching systematic discrimination continue unchallenged. Bob returned to his seat, his voice taking on the quiet authority that had made him a successful CEO. We have a choice. We can fight this case, spend millions on legal fees, risk devastating public exposure, and potentially lose anyway. We can settle privately, pay substantial damages, and hope the problem disappears while changing nothing fundamental about our culture. Or we can acknowledge our mistakes publicly, implement genuine reforms, and try to become the company I thought we already were. Catherine Walsh leaned back in her chair. Bob, what you're proposing is essentially corporate confession. You're asking us to admit systematic discrimination, accept financial liability, and commit to changes that could affect our competitive position. I'm asking us to do what's right. Michael Torres pulled out his phone and began calculating. Amanda, what would be the total cost of a public settlement with full acknowledgement and reform commitments? 12 to 15 million in direct compensation and policy implementation. Legal fees would add another 3 to 4 million. But the reputational benefits could offset some of those costs. Companies that proactively address discrimination often see improved employee retention, better recruiting outcomes, and enhanced client relationships. Dr. Sarah Chen nodded thoughtfully. There's also the risk mitigation factor. If we settle now, we control the narrative and the timing. If we fight and lose, we face much higher damages plus devastating publicity at the worst possible moment. David made one final attempt to sway the discussion. Bob, even if we acknowledge past mistakes, Maya Chen's team will use any admission against us in future litigation. We'll be painting a target on our back for every disgruntled employee with a grievance. Bob studied his old friend, seeing the fear and defensiveness that had replaced the innovative thinking that had once made David a valuable partner. David, if our employment practices are fair and equitable going forward, we won't have to worry about future discrimination complaints. The vote, when it came, was closer than Bob had hoped, but decisive enough to provide clear direction. 5 board members supported public settlement with acknowledgement of past discrimination and commitment to reform. 3, including David's, vote by proxy, preferred private settlement with minimal admission. Amanda Foster gathered her materials with the efficiency of someone accustomed to corporate reversals. I'll contact Sarah Martinez this afternoon to begin settlement negotiations. Bob, you should prepare for media attention once this becomes public. Maya Chen's team will likely want to use this case as an example of successful advocacy for workplace equality. As the board members filed out of the conference room, David lingered behind. Bob, I hope you understand what you've just done. You've essentially admitted that everything we built together was based on discrimination. Bob met his friend's gaze steadily. David, I've admitted that our good intentions weren't enough to prevent systematic bias from influencing our decisions. The difference between us is that I see that as a problem to solve, while you see it as a liability to manage. And what about my role in all this? You're essentially throwing me under the bus to protect the company's reputation. I'm asking you to take responsibility for the policies you implemented and the culture you helped create. The question is whether you're willing to be part of the solution or whether you'll continue defending practices we now know were discriminatory. David was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Seattle skyline. I'll submit my resignation. This afternoon. Effective immediately. Bob felt the weight of losing his oldest business partner, but also the relief of no longer having to navigate around David's refusal to acknowledge their failures. David, it doesn't have to end this way. We could work together to implement real changes. No, Bob. You've made it clear that acknowledging discrimination is more important than protecting the people who built this company. I won't be part of that narrative. After David left, Bob remained in the empty boardroom, contemplating the magnitude of what Pinnacle Corp had just committed to doing. Maya Chen's lawsuit had forced them to confront systematic discrimination they'd been blind to or unwilling to acknowledge. The financial cost would be substantial, but the opportunity to become genuinely equitable might prove invaluable. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya herself. Mr. Pinnacle, I heard about the board vote. I want you to know this was never about destroying the company. It was about making it better. Bob typed back. I understand that now. Thank you for having the courage to demand accountability. Outside the boardroom windows, Seattle continued its daily rhythm of ambition and innovation. But inside Pinnacle Corp, something fundamental had shifted. The company that emerged from this crisis would either be stronger and more equitable, or it would serve as a cautionary tale about the cost of ignoring systematic inequality. Bob Pinnacle was finally ready to find out which outcome his leadership would create. The Seattle Times newsroom hummed with the controlled chaos of a major story breaking. Maya Chen sat in a conference room on the 7th floor, watching through glass walls as reporters rushed between desks, editors huddled over laptops, and photographers prepared equipment for what promised to be one of the most significant corporate accountability stories of the year. Sarah Martinez reviewed her notes, one final time, her legal pad covered with bullet points and strategic reminders. Across the table, Jessica Wang checked her phone nervously, while Dr. Patricia Kim organized statistical printouts that would serve as evidence of Pinnacle Corp's systematic discrimination. Maya, Sarah said quietly, Once we start this press conference, there's no going back. Are you certain you want to reject their private settlement offer? Maya thought about the phone call from Amanda Foster 2 days earlier. Pinnacle Corp had offered $12 million split among affected employees, policy changes with independent oversight, and a confidential acknowledgement of past discriminatory practices. The offer would have made Maya financially secure, while allowing the company to avoid public admission of wrongdoing. "I'm certain," Maya replied. This was never about money. It was about creating change that protects other women from experiencing what Jessica and I went through. Jessica nodded firmly. Private settlements protect the company's reputation while allowing discriminatory practices to continue elsewhere. Public accountability creates precedent. The door opened, and Tom Richardson, the Seattle Times business editor, entered with the energy of someone who'd been preparing for this moment since Maya's lawsuit first became public. Behind him came a videographer and a photographer whose presence would ensure that Pinnacle Corp's story reached beyond traditional print media. "Ms. Chen, Ms. Martinez, thank you for choosing the Times for this announcement. I understand you have significant developments regarding your discrimination case against Pinnacle Corp." Sarah took the lead, her voice carrying the authority that had made her one of Seattle's most respected employment attorneys. Pinnacle Corp has agreed to a comprehensive settlement that includes public acknowledgement of systematic gender discrimination, substantial financial compensation for affected employees, and mandatory policy changes with independent oversight. Tom's pen moved rapidly across his notepad. "Can you specify the financial terms?" $15 million in direct compensation and policy implementation costs, an additional $4 million in legal fees. But more importantly, Pinnacle Corp has agreed to implement transparent salary reporting, mandatory bias training for all managers, and independent audits of their hiring and promotion practices. Maya watched Tom process the implications. This wasn't just another employment settlement. It was a blueprint for corporate accountability that other companies would be forced to consider. "Ms. Chen, what made you decide to pursue public resolution rather than a private settlement?" Maya had rehearsed this answer, but speaking the words still felt momentous. "Because systematic discrimination thrives in secrecy. Private settlements allow companies to pay for silence while continuing practices that harm other employees. Public accountability creates lasting change." Tom turned to Jessica Wang, who'd been quietly preparing for this moment since agreeing to join Maya's case. "Ms. Wang, you left Pinnacle Corp 2 years ago. What convinced you to come forward now?" Jessica's voice was steady, despite the weight of what she was revealing. "I left because I was told that questioning promotion decisions would damage my career prospects. I stayed silent because I was afraid and alone. When Maya filed her complaint, I realized my silence was protecting the same system that had forced me out." Dr. Patricia Kim leaned forward, her academic credentials lending gravity to her testimony. "My statistical analysis shows that gender disparities at Pinnacle Corp weren't isolated incidents but systematic patterns. Women earned 15–20% less than men for comparable work across multiple departments and job levels. These disparities persisted even when controlling for experience, performance, and negotiation history." Tom's questions grew more specific, probing. The evidence that had convinced Pinnacle Corp to settle rather than fight. Maya found herself describing Linda Morrison's quiet courage in providing payroll data, Marcus Thompson's eventual decision to testify about discriminatory practices he'd witnessed, and the mountain of documentation that had revealed the scope of systematic bias. "Ms. Martinez, how significant is this settlement in terms of legal precedent?" Sarah's smile suggested she'd been waiting for this question. "This is one of the largest employment discrimination settlements in Washington state history. More importantly, it establishes that companies can't hide behind budget constraints and market factors when those explanations mask systematic gender bias. It sends a clear message that discrimination has consequences." The press conference continued for 45 minutes, with Maya explaining her transformation from compliant employee to determined advocate, Jessica describing the personal cost of challenging corporate power, and Dr. Kim detailing the statistical evidence that had made Pinnacle Corp's discrimination impossible to deny. As they prepared to leave the Seattle Times building, Maya's phone buzzed with notifications from social media, news alerts, and text messages from colleagues across the tech industry. The story was already spreading beyond Seattle, picked up by national business publications and employment law blogs. Marcus Thompson's text stood out among the others. Maya, I saw the news. I'm proud of you for seeing this through. The company needed this wake-up call. Sarah gathered her materials, with the satisfaction of someone who'd achieved both personal and professional victory. Maya, you should prepare for significant media attention over the next few weeks. This case is going to be cited in employment law discussions across the country. Good, Maya replied. Maybe it will encourage other women to demand accountability instead of accepting discrimination as normal. They walked through downtown Seattle toward Pike Place Market, needing space to decompress after the intensity of the press conference. The afternoon sun had burned through the marine layer, illuminating the city with the sharp clarity that made Seattle beautiful despite its reputation for gray skies. Jessica? Maya said as they found a quiet coffee shop. What's next for you? Jessica's smile was the first genuinely relaxed expression Maya had seen from her since their initial meeting at Victrola Coffee. I'm consulting with 3 companies that want to proactively audit their employment practices. Apparently, public accountability creates business opportunities for people who understand discrimination issues. Dr. Patricia Kim pulled out her phone to show them news alerts already appearing on employment law websites. Maya, your case is being discussed in academic circles as a model for using statistical analysis to prove systematic discrimination. I'm already receiving requests to consult on similar cases. Maya felt the weight of unintended consequences, positive ones that rippled far beyond her individual complaint. Her fight for fair compensation had become a catalyst for broader change in how employment discrimination was identified and addressed. Her phone rang with a call from Bob Pinnacle himself. Ms. Chen, I wanted to personally thank you for your commitment to making Pinnacle Corp better, rather than simply punishing us for past mistakes. Maya found herself surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Mr. Pinnacle, accountability isn't punishment. It's an opportunity for improvement. I understand that now. I also want you to know that David Holloway submitted his resignation yesterday. We're implementing the policy changes immediately, not waiting for the legal requirements to take effect. The news about David was in Holloway didn't surprise Maya, but it confirmed that Pinnacle Corp was serious about cultural change rather than just legal compliance. Mr. Pinnacle, I hope this experience helps other companies recognize discrimination before lawsuits become necessary. Marcus paused, his voice becoming more emotional. I told myself that staying silent was neutral, that I couldn't be held responsible for discrimination I didn't personally commit. But neutrality in the face of systematic oppression isn't neutral. It's complicity. Maya felt the weight of his admission, recognizing the courage it took to acknowledge moral failure rather than defensive rationalization. Marcus, I never expected you to risk your career for my fight. But that's exactly what you did. You risked everything to challenge practices that were harming people. And while I was protecting my own comfort, you were protecting everyone who came after us. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, processing the evolution of their relationship from colleagues to adversaries to something approaching mutual respect. Maya, there's something else. Dr. Torres asked me to participate in a working group developing new hiring and promotion protocols. We're creating systems designed to identify and interrupt bias before it affects employment decisions. Maya felt genuinely pleased by the development. That sounds like meaningful work. It is, but it's also made me realize how much I didn't understand about my own privilege. I benefited from systems that discriminated against women like you and Jessica, and I convinced myself that my success was purely merit-based. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Maya a photo from a recent company meeting. The leadership team was noticeably more diverse than the all-male group that had made employment decisions during her tenure. Maya, I want to ask you something, and I'll understand if the answer is no. Dr. Torres is organizing a panel discussion about workplace discrimination for the entire company. She wants current employees to hear directly from people who experienced our previous culture. Would you consider participating? Maya studied Marcus's face, seeing genuine commitment to change rather than performative guilt. What would the panel involve? You, Jessica, and Linda Morrison sharing your experiences with systematic discrimination. Dr. Torres thinks hearing directly from people who were harmed by our policies would help employees understand why the changes are necessary. The invitation intrigued Maya, offering an opportunity to directly influence Pinnacle Corp's cultural transformation rather than just monitoring it from outside. I'll consider it. But Marcus, I need to know that this isn't just corporate theater, designed to make people feel good about symbolic progress. It's not. Dr. Torres is serious about creating lasting change. She's fired 3 managers who couldn't adapt to the new equity requirements, restructured compensation to eliminate disparities, and implemented accountability measures that make discrimination professionally costly. After Marcus left, Maya returned to her home office and opened her laptop to research Dr. Samantha Torres. The woman's credentials were impressive: Harvard PhD in organizational psychology, previous experience transforming workplace cultures. At major corporations, published research on interrupting unconscious bias in employment decisions. More importantly, news articles about Dr. Torres's previous work suggested she understood that meaningful change required systemic transformation rather than superficial policy adjustments. Companies she'd worked with had achieved measurable improvements in employee satisfaction, retention, and advancement equity. Maya's phone rang with a call from Sarah Martinez, whose law practice had expanded significantly following their Pinnacle Corp victory. Maya, I have news about the ripple effects from your case. 3 more tech companies have reached out requesting guidance on proactive discrimination audits. Your public settlement created a market for preventive legal compliance. That's encouraging. Any other developments? The Washington state legislature is considering employment transparency legislation modeled on the reporting requirements we negotiated with Pinnacle Corp. Your case provided the evidence base for statewide policy changes. Maya felt the broader impact of her individual fight, recognizing that challenging systematic discrimination had created momentum for institutional change beyond her former employer. Sarah, Marcus Thompson visited tonight. Pinnacle Corp wants me to participate in a company-wide panel about workplace discrimination. What do you think? Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. It could be valuable if they're genuinely committed to cultural change. But you should be cautious about being used as cover for superficial reforms. How would I evaluate their sincerity? Demand to see their demographic promotion data, salary audit results, and employee retention statistics. Real change produces measurable outcomes, not just good intentions. The next morning, Maya drove downtown to the Columbia Tower for her 6-month review meeting with Pinnacle Corp's independent compliance monitor. The 32nd floor conference room where they met had been transformed since her settlement negotiations. Gone were the intimidating legal documents and defensive postures, replaced by collaborative working groups and transparent data presentations. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the compliance monitor, greeted Maya with the efficiency of someone who'd spent her career evaluating corporate reform efforts. Ms. Chen, thank you for participating in this review process. Your oversight role has been crucial to ensuring accountability. Maya settled into her chair, noting the comprehensive reports spread across the conference table. Dr. Rodriguez, what's your assessment of Pinnacle Corp's progress? Impressive, frankly. I've monitored compliance efforts for 15 years, and most companies implement minimum required changes while maintaining existing cultures. Pinnacle Corp has exceeded their obligations in almost every category. Dr. Rodriguez walked Maya through statistical improvements that went far beyond legal requirements. Gender pay equity had been achieved ahead of schedule. Promotion rates for women and minorities had increased dramatically. Employee satisfaction surveys showed marked improvement in perceptions of fairness and opportunity. More importantly, Dr. Rodriguez continued, they've created structural changes that make discrimination systematically difficult rather than relying on individual goodwill. Transparent salary bands, diverse hiring panels, standardized performance evaluations. These systems interrupt bias at institutional levels. Maya studied the demographic data, recognizing the scope of transformation that had occurred since her lawsuit. Dr. Rodriguez, do you believe these changes are sustainable? That's the crucial question. Dr. Torres has built accountability into every aspect of their employment processes. Managers are evaluated on equity metrics, not just financial performance. Advancement depends on demonstrating inclusive leadership capabilities. The incentive structure now rewards fairness rather than tolerating discrimination. As Maya reviewed the compliance reports, she felt cautiously optimistic about Pinnacle Corp's transformation. The company that had systematically undervalued women and dismissed her legitimate complaints had become a model for proactive workplace equity. Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda Morrison. Maya, I wanted you to know that my age discrimination complaint was resolved this week. Pinnacle Corp acknowledged the violation and implemented additional protections for older employees. Your case created the foundation for addressing other forms of workplace bias. Maya smiled, recognizing that her fight for gender equity had enabled Linda to challenge age discrimination with institutional support rather than individual isolation. That afternoon, Maya met Jessica Wang at the same Victrola Coffee where they'd first collaborated on building their discrimination case. Jessica looked confident and energized in a way that contrasted sharply with the bitter, defeated woman Maya had met 6 months earlier. Maya, I have news about the Portland case. The tech company settled for $8 million and agreed to implement comprehensive equity reforms. They cited your Pinnacle Corp case as evidence that fighting discrimination complaints was more expensive than addressing them proactively. Maya felt the satisfaction of having created precedent that protected women beyond her own situation. That's encouraging. What's next for your consulting practice? I'm expanding to work with companies across the West Coast. Apparently, your public settlement convinced executives that employment discrimination lawsuits are preventable business risks rather than inevitable costs of doing business. They spent an hour discussing the broader cultural changes their collaboration had catalyzed. Employment lawyers throughout the region reported increased interest in proactive compliance audits. HR departments were implementing bias interruption, training voluntarily rather than waiting for legal requirements. Job seekers were demanding salary transparency and equity information during interview processes. Jessica, Pinnacle Corp has invited me to participate in a company-wide panel about workplace discrimination. Part of me wants to see their cultural transformation firsthand, but part of me worries about being used for corporate public relations. Jessica considered the invitation thoughtfully. Maya, you negotiated oversight rights precisely to evaluate their sincerity versus their performance. If Dr. Torres and Bob Pinnacle are genuinely committed to change, your participation could reinforce their transformation. If they're managing appearances, you'll recognize it immediately. And if it's genuine, then you have an opportunity to directly influence the workplace culture of your former employer. Not many people get to see whether their advocacy created lasting change. That evening, Maya sat in her home office reviewing emails from women across the country who'd been inspired by her case to challenge workplace discrimination. The messages had evolved from expressions of support during her legal battle to reports of successful advocacy in their own organizations. A message from a software engineer in Austin. Maya, I used your case as a model for documenting salary disparities at my company. We achieved pay equity for all female employees without litigation. Another from a marketing director in Denver. Your public settlement convinced my company to conduct voluntary bias training for all managers. They didn't want to risk becoming the next Pinnacle Corp discrimination case. A third from a recent law school graduate. Ms. Chen, I'm writing my thesis on employment discrimination law, using your case as an example of successful advocacy. Your fight is influencing the next generation of employment attorneys. Maya realized that her individual complaint about a denied raise had evolved into something much larger, a catalyst for institutional change that extended far beyond her own experience. The price of justice had been higher than she'd anticipated, requiring months of legal stress, professional isolation, and personal scrutiny. But the victory had also been greater than she'd imagined, creating systemic change that would protect employees she'd never meet. Her laptop chimed with an email from Bob Pinnacle himself. Ms. Chen, I wanted to personally update you on our 6-month progress. The cultural transformation we've implemented has exceeded every metric we established. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high. Voluntary turnover has decreased by 60%. And our recruiting success has improved dramatically as word spreads about our inclusive workplace culture. More importantly, we're attracting top talent specifically because of our reputation for equity and fairness. Thank you for forcing us to become the company we should have been from the beginning. Maya stared at the message, processing its implications. The man who'd been CEO during her discrimination had thanked her for forcing institutional change that had ultimately benefited his company's performance and reputation. She typed back, Mr. Pinnacle, I'm glad the changes have been successful. I hope Pinnacle Corp's transformation inspires other companies to address discrimination proactively rather than waiting for legal action. His response came quickly. Ms. Chen, we've become an informal model for other tech companies seeking to implement genuine workplace equity. Your case study is being discussed in business schools and executive development programs. The precedent you established is creating change throughout the industry. Maya closed her laptop and walked to her window, looking out at the Seattle evening. The city looked the same as it had 18 months ago when she'd first walked into David Holloway's office requesting a raise that led to this entire journey. But everything else had fundamentally changed. She'd lost her illusions about corporate meritocracy and gained a clear understanding of how systematic discrimination operated. She'd sacrificed the comfortable anonymity of a compliant employee and discovered the power of principled advocacy. She'd risked her individual career and created opportunities for countless other women facing similar challenges. The financial settlement had provided security, but the systemic changes had provided something more valuable: the knowledge that her suffering had prevented others from experiencing the same discrimination. Maya picked up her phone and composed a message to Dr. Torres at Pinnacle Corp. Dr. Torres, I would be honored to participate in your panel discussion about workplace discrimination. If my experience can help current employees understand why equity matters, I'm committed to that conversation. The response came within minutes. Ms. Chen, thank you. Your participation will demonstrate that advocacy and accountability can create positive change rather than just punitive consequences. As Maya prepared for bed, she reflected on the transformation that had begun with a simple request for fair compensation and evolved into a comprehensive challenge to systematic workplace discrimination. The price of justice had included professional risk, personal stress, and emotional exhaustion. But the cost of accepting injustice would have been higher, not just for her, but for every woman who might have faced similar discrimination in the future. Maya Chen had asked for a raise and ended up transforming an entire industry's approach to workplace equity. The individual fight for recognition had become a collective victory for systematic change. And while the battle against discrimination was far from over, Maya had proven that individual courage could create institutional transformation. The price of justice was never just personal. It was an investment in creating a world where the next Maya Chen wouldn't have to choose between accepting discrimination and risking everything to challenge it. Justice, Maya had learned, wasn't a destination, but a commitment to ongoing vigilance, accountability, and the courage to demand better from the institutions that shaped people's lives. Her fight was ending, but the work of creating genuine equity was just beginning. The phone rang one final time that evening. Sarah Martinez with news that another tech company had reached out requesting guidance on implementing proactive discrimination prevention programs. "Maya," Sarah said, "your case has created something unprecedented, a market incentive for preventing discrimination rather than just defending against it. Companies are learning that equity isn't just morally right, it's economically smart." Maya smiled, recognizing that the most powerful form of justice was making fairness profitable rather than costly. "Sarah, I think we've created something better than victory. We've created change." Outside her window, Seattle's lights sparkled against the darkness, each one representing possibilities that hadn't existed before Maya Chen decided to document salary disparities, rather than accepting David Holloway's dismissive explanations. The city looked the same, but the systems that governed workplace equality would never be the same again. The price of justice had been fully paid, and the returns were still accumulating. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.